Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be applying sociological theories to account for race and ethnicity. The three major theories of sociology are structural functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism. Each of these theories can be used in diverse ways. I'll just cover a couple of the ways that we possibly could apply sociological theories to study race. Functionalism states that all institutions contribute to the functioning of the whole. For example, the education system, the economy, family, media, government, politics, religion, culture, they all serve a purpose, which is to structure the lives of groups of people. Because again, what is society but a group of people with a common bond? So, the idea of functionalism when it comes to race, we could look at it from a cultural perspective. What's the function of race? Well, how is race associated with our culture, our common way of life? So, our racial identity, our being socialized into a racial group, serves a purpose, which is to socialize us into a way of life, for example. Another way to apply functionalist theory is to say, what's the purpose of race? Now you have to get into the motivations of where does race come from. If we were to look at it maybe kind of from a conflict theory perspective, which I'll approach in a second, the idea from a functionalist perspective is what's the function of race? And this is to clearly dictate who's allowed to take which social role. Because American society, for example, has been divided into social classes, and your race historically dictated whether or not you were allowed to rise up the social class ladder. Racial categories very clearly define who is certified to take on specific social positions. Hence the idea that you never had an African American or an Asian or a Native American president until the 2000s, for example. Again, why did we go 300 years without ever having a non-white president? And again, the purpose of race is to divide society into groups and then, from a functionalist perspective, maintain the privileged position of those that are European status. A conflict theory perspective might look at it from groups competing with groups. Yes, race was created to serve a purpose, which was so Europeans could dominate society and subjugate the rest. And yes, race does highly influence the culture that we are socialized into. But again, race is all about one group competing with another group. A conflict theory perspective of race would say race was socially constructed so that Europeans could have power over non-Europeans. Therefore, we created all these different ways of categorizing each other into different races in order to maintain a privileged position so that Europeans, who are also, described as white, could dominate society. Hence, Europeans created and maintained racial categories so that they could maintain a dominant position within society. And again, is this fair? The question is no. Again, so America historically has not been equitable. It has not been fair for women and minorities. Again, we would not be having this class. We would be looking at it from an anthropological perspective, like looking at ethnicity and culture and people's way of life, but we wouldn't be looking at it from a privilege, power, and oppression perspective if racism, prejudice, and discrimination did not exist. Okay, so again, conflict theory would say, races were created to divide society into separate groups that could be hierarchically ranked so that one group had power over another group, and that group in a dominant position, maintain their privilege and power by convincing the world that they were different from somebody else. So again, we need to be questioning the biological basis for race because the people that created racial categories in the 1600s and the 1700s did not have genetic evidence like we have in modern times. All they had was, are you European, yes or no? Because if you're European, you get to be white and you guys to rise up the hierarchy. If you're not, we're sticking you down on the bottom as a slave or at least as an indentured servant. And even poor white people were also put and subjugated down there also. So again, it's the association between race and social class. Races were created so that you had a very clear-cut idea of who got to be the bourgeoisie and who got to be the proletariat. From a symbolic interactionist perspective, we could say society is created by us interacting. Okay, we're the ones who created the institution of race. So, with functionalism arguing that we create institutions to serve a purpose, institutions are not just physical, institutions are also ideological. We have institutionalized gender roles for thousands of years, traditional gender roles, women as homemakers and men as breadwinners. We are challenging those social norms in modern times in the United States, and you're seeing dramatic changes as women rise up the social class ladder, now to the extent that they're getting more college degrees than men. But historically, we subjugated women and minorities into these lower class statuses. Symbolic interactionism is going to say, look, we're the ones who institutionalize race. We're the ones who made it up in the first place. There's no biological basis for race. We made up the category for economic purposes. Guys, if race is not working, we can deconstruct racial categories. We can change the meanings attached to race, which is one way to end prejudice and discrimination and racism. Change the negative stereotypes, change the stigmatization effects. Also, we could stop thinking about race altogether. Stop calling yourself white and black and Asian. One of my favorite articles is from the medical community saying we need to stop accounting for race in our medical studies because race just messes everything up. When we control for race, the data doesn't make any sense. Okay, because people of all that are, of different races, we're all blended. None of it, this idea that all people that are African American share something in common is not accurate. So when medical studies account for race, it tends to mix up all the data, and it just doesn't make sense because race is not something we can control for and then make sense with. Because there's no real differences, like in those ways that you might think, between African Americans, Asians, and white people, for example. Okay? So a symbolic interactionist perspective says, guys, we're the ones who made it up. We can deconstruct race at any time. We can just stop calling ourselves white and black and Asian and Native American. Stop. Or at least change the meanings attached to race. Again, symbolic interactionism, symbolic communicating. We symbolically communicate with each other to build society, to build institutions. We built race. We can unbuild it. Okay? So that's a couple of ways to take the major theories and apply those. Then we can look at things like identity theory. How does race influence your identity and your personality? And then how does that influence your brain structure and your cognitions and the way you think? Why is there an association between things like being biracial and higher suicide rates? Same thing for farmers. Why do farmers have higher suicide rates? What is it about that experience, that disconnect from a group? Is it because you're caught between two groups? You get culture conflict. And why does a farmer have higher suicide rates? Is it because they're disconnected from society? So how important is a positive racial identity? And when you look at psychological studies of positive racial identities, that tends to overcome stigmatization effects and prejudice and discrimination. So again, if you have words like biracial, what does that even mean? I'm saying I'm biracial. I'm saying that I have at least two races, European and Native American. I have Cherokee in my blood. What do you call that? And there's no such thing as a pure race. That doesn't exist. Okay, so again, we could really reduce stigmatization effects by either deconstructing race or changing the meanings attached to race. So again, identity and race is a huge part of our identity. That's why it's really difficult to think of yourself as not having a race. And I'm not the first one to say this though, guys. All of this is based upon research. My favorite person that suggests dropping race is a Harvard professor who's African American. Historically did identify as African American, does not anymore. But he's a Harvard professor who has been talking about this for 20, 30 years. So this is not a new idea, the idea that you're not white, you're not black. And again, the Supreme Court says very clearly, white is an ethnicity. It's not a race. They're just a bunch of pan-ethnicities. Hispanic is not a race. It's a pan-ethnicity. Black, African American, these are pan-ethnicities. You're trying to group people from Africa to people in North America, for example. But again, is that accurate? Are they the same race? I mean, you also can go the dark side and ask questions like the dark side of slavery, the influence of plantation owners and rape, and do most African Americans in the United States have, a lot of mixing just because of the rape? And again, that's the really dark side. But we're studying society. It's not all pretty, okay? So a lot of this is dark. And again, the disclaimer when you study sociology is a lot of it's tough to study. It's hard to think about plantation owners and how they treated slaves. But then how did that affect genetic blending? Okay, so we need to be thinking about these things. Labeling theory, the idea of labeling people, how does that stigmatize people? When you guys get into race and the sociological theories, when you open this, I'm not going to get as deep into the theories because this goes pretty deep into it also, but you're going to have this lecture on race and the sociological theories that goes really deep into what I just introduced to you. And then you guys are going to, after you finish this, you're going to watch this. As you guys are watching these videos, you're going to be taking this quiz. So all you do is you click on this, you open this up, and then here's your quiz, and then you just hit continue, and then you begin to take the quiz and watch the video. Usually I would maybe half my screen like this, and then do my quiz over here, and then my video over here. That tends to work really well for me, but whatever is most convenient for you. So you guys will watch those lectures, and then you will take this quiz as you go. And then the other assignment that you guys need to complete this week is called the Typical American assignment. And you guys will open up this link here. For this assignment, you're going to open up this chapter on the Typical American. Okay, you're going to read the attached chapter. Then you're going to answer the discussion questions at the end of the chapter. To find the discussion questions at the end of the chapter, it's all the way down on here on the bottom. Okay. Yep, here we go. Starting with discussion questions right here. And it says you need to complete, you just need to do all the discussion questions except question 8. Okay, 70 words for each discussion, so you end up with about a 400 to 500 word paper. It should end up being about a full page, single spaced, two-paged, double spaced, okay? And it says quite clearly, do not quote. So when I'm reading, I usually read and then I write, read and then I write, okay? And so that tends to help me when it comes to paraphrasing and avoiding quoting. And then when you're done with this assignment, you'll put it here in the Typical American Dropbox, okay? Please email with any questions. Thank you so much.